Confined spaces are dangerous. Year after year, people die when entering them to carry out work. Investigations show that most casualties are caused by poor training and poor knowledge of correct entry procedures or a disregard for them. That's why you need to be aware of the dangers and the correct entry procedures. That's why you need to take proper precautions, even in an emergency. So, what is a confined space? It's an enclosed or partially enclosed space that is not intended or designed primarily for human occupancy, within which there is a risk of one or more of the following: a lack of oxygen, too much oxygen, airborne contaminants, flammable contaminants. What do you have to do? Identify the hazards associated with working in a confined space and conduct a risk assessment. Control the risks posed by the hazards by elimination by forced ventilation, minimisation, including the use of personal protective equipment. Before any work is undertaken in a confined space, a competent person should identify all of the hazards associated with entry to, exit from, and any work in the space. The standard gives detailed information on hazard identification. What is a competent person? A competent person is a person who has, by a combination of training, education, experience, acquired knowledge and skills to enable him or her to make an informed assessment of the likelihood of an airborne contaminant being present or correctly perform a specific task associated with a confined space. A competent person should undertake a risk assessment for any work to be conducted in a confined space and prepare a written report on the risks before a written authority to work is issued. The competent person should consider the matters in the standard and also the nature of the confined space, the estimated duration of the work, and any potential hazard inside the space. You should consider the following. As a first step, always check to see if the work can be done with equipment from outside the confined space. The golden rule is, don't go in if you don't have to. Work practices should be designed to minimise the need to enter confined spaces. Prevent accidental introduction of materials, e.g. steam, water or bulk materials, through piping, ducts, vents, etc. De-energise, lock-out or tag-out machinery. Blank off pipelines or other openings and close valves. Tie valves or use some other means to indicate that they are not to be opened and place notices on the relevant controls. Inform the officer on watch. Where necessary, suspend pumping operations or cargo movements when entry is being made into a confined space. Use a blower designed for the purpose to ventilate the confined space. When blowing air into the space, make sure a high volume of air is blown in at a low speed. This can be provided by trunking and a blower made especially for this purpose. Then test the air again for levels of oxygen and other gases to ensure that contaminants are reduced to a safe and acceptable level. Use a suitable cleaning method to remove harmful solids or sludges. This may in itself lead to the release of gases, so take precautions. Purge with fresh air to remove harmful gases or vapours. Always be aware that oxygen-deficient areas may exist even when a confined space has been satisfactorily tested, and you should always suspect these will be present. This can be caused by the internal structure of the space. Cargo. Cargo residues and tank coatings, especially where the path of supply and outlet ventilation is obstructed by structural members or cargo. A record of the testing should be retained for 5 years. Particular care should be taken when working on pipelines and valves within the space. If conditions change during such work, the competent person should increase the frequency of atmospheric testing. Changing conditions that may occur include increasing ambient temperatures, the use of oxygen fuel torches or mobile plant, work activities in the enclosed space that could evolve vapours. Test and, if necessary, monitor the atmosphere with an approved gas monitor. If the space cannot be ventilated, or if the work will contaminate the atmosphere, e.g. hot work, painting, sludge removal, use a suitable self-contained breathing apparatus or supplied air respirator as specified in the standard. If the authority to work identifies that PPE or any other equipment is necessary for work in the confined space, it should be accessible and suitable for the work to be carried out. Selecting the right protective safety and other equipment. All equipment provided for use in or in connection with entry to or work in a confined space or during an emergency response should be maintained to be fit for the purpose for which it was provided. A record of maintenance of the equipment should be retained for 5 years. The PCBU or person responsible for the work should issue a written authority or confined space entry permit, as described in the standard. Essentially, this authority is a safety checklist to make sure nothing is overlooked. Have a trained standby person to monitor the safety of the person entering and working inside the space. Take action if an emergency arises and communicate with the officer of the watch. Ensure there is a reliable system of communication by voice, radio, hand signals, hardwired communication, or other means. Test the air in a confined space constantly, as oxygen and gas levels in such spaces can change quickly. Be alert for any change in conditions. If the atmosphere in a confined space is suspected or known to be unsafe, nobody should enter the space if a practical alternative exists. Entry should only be made for further testing, essential operation, safety of life, or safety of a ship. There should be a system for getting a worker out of the confined space quickly if anything goes wrong. This could include using a safety harness and safety line or rescue line. A Neil Robinson stretcher is found on many merchant ships and used in evacuation of personnel from confined spaces. If you see someone lying motionless, even if at the bottom of a ladder in an enclosed space, do not go in to carry out a rescue by yourself. Typically, personnel react by rushing into lethal atmospheres under the misconception that they will be able to save colleagues. But unplanned rescues are likely to end in tragedy. When an emergency occurs, the alarm should be sounded so that backup is immediately available to the rescue team. Under no circumstances should the standby person enter the space before help has arrived and the situation has been evaluated. The safety of rescuers entering the space must be ensured. Provide training for all workers who may be involved in confined space work, including standby persons, to ensure they have the skills to safely do the work. Regularly reassess workers' competency for working in confined spaces. Have a site-specific emergency procedure and emergency equipment for every confined space job. This will include first aid, firefighting equipment, a rescue procedure for workers who may be injured or incapacitated, PPE and RPE for rescuers, an emergency contact details register, a CABA, compressed air breathing apparatus, and a communication device. Test rescue procedures to make sure they are safe and effective. It is not easy to extract a person from a confined space. When testing rescue procedures, make the situation as realistic as possible, but not in a confined space. The victim and the rescuer are likely to be wearing PPE and RPE that may make it more difficult to extract them. It is therefore vital that everyone who works in or near a confined space is aware of their dangers, learns the correct entry procedures, whether or not it is a requirement of their role, and understands that confined spaces should not be entered without following proper precautions, even in an emergency. Thank you. To see the guidance in full and how it applies to you, visit maritimενz.gov.nz/confined spaces.